The airport terminal buzzed with the usual chaos of modern air travel. Travelers rushed past gate agents, dragging oversized luggage and clutching boarding passes while juggling coffee cups and smartphones. Flight announcements echoed through the corridors, blending into a monotonous drone that most passengers had learned to tune out. It was just another ordinary Tuesday afternoon at a major American hub, where thousands of people passed through on their way to business meetings, family reunions, and vacation destinations. But for one man standing quietly at Gate 14, this was far from an ordinary trip. Army First Sergeant Michael Rodriguez stood in his dress uniform, the dark blue fabric pressed to perfection, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. The rows of ribbons on his chest told stories that most civilians would never understand, stories of sacrifice, courage, and brotherhood, forged in the unforgiving landscapes of distant battlefields. His face was composed, stoic even, but his eyes held a weight that seemed to age him beyond his 38 years. He wasn't traveling for business or pleasure. He was fulfilling the most sacred duty a soldier can perform, escorting a fallen comrade home for the last time. In the cargo hold below, carefully secured and treated with the utmost reverence, was a flag-draped transfer case containing the remains of Private First Class Daniel Hayes. Danny, as his friends called him, had been just 22 years old when an improvised explosive device cut short his life during a routine patrol in the Middle East. He left behind a young wife, a 3-month-old daughter he'd only met through video calls, and a mother who would now have to bury her only son. Rodriguez had known Danny. They'd served in the same company, shared meals in dusty mess tents, and endured the blistering heat and bone-chilling cold of deployment together. When Rodriguez learned that Danny had been killed, he immediately volunteered to serve as his escort. It was the least he could do for a brother-in-arms who would never get the chance to hold his baby girl or grow old with his high school sweetheart. The military has strict protocols for fallen soldier escorts. These service members accompany the remains from the point of death all the way to the final resting place, ensuring that the fallen are never alone, never treated as mere cargo. They coordinate with airlines, funeral homes, and military personnel to guarantee that every step of the journey is conducted with dignity and honor. It's a responsibility that escorts take with profound seriousness. Rodriguez had already completed the first leg of the journey without incident. The connecting flight was supposed to be routine, just a 2-hour hop to bring Danny closer to his hometown in rural Pennsylvania, where hundreds of community members were already preparing to line the streets for the funeral procession. As boarding began, Rodriguez approached the gate agent, a young woman in her mid-20s who was mechanically scanning boarding passes with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this thousands of times before. He presented his military travel orders and explained his situation, expecting the same respectful accommodation he'd received on the previous flight. "I'm escorting a fallen soldier," he said quietly, mindful of not drawing unnecessary attention. "His remains are in the cargo hold. According to protocol, I need to be the last person to board and the first person to deplane so I can coordinate with ground crew and ensure proper handling of the transfer case." The gate agent barely looked up from her computer screen. "Sir, you're in boarding group 4. You'll need to wait until your group is called." Rodriguez maintained his composure. "I understand, ma'am, but this is a military escort situation. I have official orders here that explain the procedures. I've been doing this for the past 2 flights without any issues." She sighed with visible irritation, as if he were deliberately trying to complicate her day. "Sir, everyone boards according to their assigned group. I can't make exceptions. You'll need to wait your turn like everyone else. Ma'am, this isn't about me getting special treatment. This is about ensuring that a fallen American soldier is treated with the respect and dignity he deserves. I need to coordinate with—" "Sir," she interrupted, her voice rising slightly, "I've already explained the policy. Please step aside so I can board the other passengers. You're holding up the line." Rodriguez felt his jaw tighten, but he stepped aside. He watched as business travelers, families with children, and tourists filed past him onto the aircraft. Each announcement of a new boarding group felt like a small betrayal of the promise he'd made, to stay with Danny, to ensure everything was done right. The other passengers seemed oblivious to what was unfolding. They complained about overhead bin space, argued over seat assignments, and scrolled through their phones, completely unaware that just below their feet, a hero was making his final journey home. When Group 4 was finally called, Rodriguez boarded with the general passengers. As he found his seat, he pulled out his phone and quickly sent a message to his commanding officer, explaining the situation. He also contacted the receiving honor guard at his destination airport, alerting them to potential complications with the dignified transfer upon landing. But something else was happening that Rodriguez couldn't see. A retired Marine colonel flying first class had overheard the entire exchange at the gate. He'd watched the scene unfold with growing anger, remembering the friends he'd lost in Vietnam and the sacred duty of bringing them home. He immediately pulled out his phone and made a call to the airline's customer service, describing what he'd witnessed and demanding to speak with a supervisor. At the same time, several other passengers who'd noticed Rodriguez's uniform and overheard fragments of conversation were taking to social media, posting about what they'd seen. Within minutes, tweets were circulating about an airline that had refused to accommodate a fallen soldier escort. The flight was unremarkable. 2 hours of cruising at 35,000 feet, flight attendants serving drinks and pretzels, passengers watching movies or working on laptops. But Rodriguez couldn't relax. He kept thinking about Danny's family waiting at the destination, about the sacred trust that had been carelessly dismissed by bureaucratic indifference. As the plane began its descent, the captain's voice came over the intercom with an announcement that made everyone pause. The captain's voice crackled through the speakers with an authority that commanded immediate attention. The usual background chatter of passengers gathering their belongings ceased, and even those who typically ignored in-flight announcements looked up from their devices. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain James Mitchell speaking. Before we complete our landing procedures, I need to address something of critical importance." There was a pause, heavy with meaning. "We have the distinct honor of having a fallen American hero on board this aircraft today. Private First Class Daniel Hayes is being escorted home by First Sergeant Michael Rodriguez, who is seated in the main cabin." The atmosphere in the plane shifted instantly. Passengers who had been concerned only with making their connections or getting to baggage claim first suddenly became very still. Some placed their hands over their hearts. Others bowed their heads. The captain continued, his voice thick with emotion that even the tinny speaker system couldn't diminish. "Upon landing, everyone will remain seated until First Sergeant Rodriguez has deplaned. There will be no exceptions. We will wait as long as necessary to ensure that Private First Class Hayes is given the dignified transfer he has earned and deserves. If this causes you to miss a connection, our airline will make it right. But right now, showing respect for this young man's sacrifice is our only priority." Rodriguez felt dozens of eyes turn toward him. His throat tightened, and he kept his gaze fixed straight ahead, maintaining the military bearing that had been drilled into him, but feeling the weight of Danny's loss more acutely than ever. An elderly woman across the aisle reached over and gently squeezed his hand. He nodded in acknowledgement, not trusting himself to speak. The plane touched down smoothly, and true to the captain's word, no one moved. The usual scramble for the overhead bins didn't happen. No one stood up. No one reached for their luggage. The cabin remained in a profound, respectful silence that felt almost sacred. As the aircraft came to a complete stop at the gate, Rodriguez unbuckled his seatbelt and stood. He moved deliberately through the aisle, and as he passed, passengers met his eyes with nods of respect, quiet thank yous, and tearful recognition. A businessman in an expensive suit saluted him. A mother with a baby whispered, "God bless you." A teenage boy, perhaps 17 or 18, watched with wide eyes, perhaps understanding for the first time the real cost of the freedom he enjoyed. When Rodriguez reached the front of the plane, Captain Mitchell emerged from the cockpit. He was a silver-haired man in his late 50s, and his eyes were red-rimmed. He stood at attention and rendered a crisp salute. "First Sergeant, I apologize for what happened at the gate," Mitchell said, his voice low but firm. "That agent has already been spoken to, and I can assure you it will never happen again on any flight I command. It would be my honor to accompany you for the dignified transfer." Rodriguez returned the salute. "I appreciate that, sir. Thank you for what you did up there." "It was the absolute least I could do," Mitchell replied. "My son is stationed in Afghanistan right now. Every service member who comes home, whether standing or in a flag-draped casket, deserves our utmost respect." Together, they exited the aircraft. On the tarmac below, Rodriguez could see the carefully choreographed scene that represented everything the gate agent had nearly compromised. An honor guard stood at attention. 6 service members in dress uniforms, their movements precise and reverent. A hearse waited nearby, its back door open and ready. Airport operations had cleared the area, and ground crew members stood at a respectful distance, many with their hands over their hearts. Captain Mitchell descended the stairs with Rodriguez, and as they reached the tarmac, he too stood at attention with the others. The cargo hold was opened with solemn ceremony, and the transfer case containing Private First Class Hayes was carefully, methodically brought into view. The American flag draped over the case rippled slightly in the afternoon breeze. The honor guard moved in perfect synchronization, 6 sets of white-gloved hands securing the transfer case with absolute precision. Not a word was spoken. The only sounds were the distant rumble of other aircraft and the wind across the tarmac. Rodriguez stood at attention, his salute unwavering as Danny was transferred from the aircraft to the hearse. He thought about the kid who'd enlisted with stars in his eyes and patriotism in his heart. He thought about the soldier Danny had become, dependable, brave, always quick with a joke even in the darkest moments. He thought about the husband and father Danny would never get to be. Meanwhile, back inside the terminal, a very different scene was unfolding. The retired Marine colonel who'd made the initial complaint had been joined by several other passengers, including a congressional aide who happened to be on the flight. They'd assembled at the customer service desk, where a regional manager for the airline was rapidly realizing the magnitude of the situation. The gate agent who dismissed Rodriguez's request stood off to the side, her earlier confidence completely evaporated. She looked young and scared, finally understanding that her rigid adherence to boarding procedures had nearly resulted in a public relations catastrophe and, more importantly, a profound dishonor to a fallen soldier. The regional manager, a composed woman named Patricia Hernandez, listened to the complaints with growing alarm. She pulled up the gate agent's computer records and saw that Rodriguez had indeed presented proper military escort documentation. The protocols were clear, and they had been ignored. "This is unacceptable," Hernandez said firmly, looking at the assembled passengers. "On behalf of our airline, I offer my sincerest apologies. Our company has specific policies to honor military escorts and fallen service members, and those policies were not followed today. I assure you this will be addressed immediately and comprehensively." She turned to the gate agent. "Emma, go home for the day. Report to my office tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. We'll be discussing this in detail along with HR." The young woman nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I didn't understand. That's why we have training," Hernandez replied, her tone stern but not cruel. "And that's why we're going to make sure this never happens again." Out on the tarmac, the dignified transfer was complete, the hearse doors closed, and the vehicle began its slow journey toward the funeral home where Danny's family waited.